Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Indian maritime strength. Myself, and as you can see, I have with me Commodore Anil Singh, who's the Vice President of Indian Maritime Foundation. I've tried to understand from him in couple of online and as well as offline chats with regards what is the Indian maritime strength, where do we stand, what is required. There's just so much that there is to be learned about this new arena. For some very reason, a lot of us have been pointed our directions towards the north, have actually forgotten the vast open Indian Ocean that we've got there. In that context, there is another aircraft carrier on the way. The rumor has it that it's going to be launched on or somewhere around Independence Day. I'd like to know from sir, what is this carrier all about? What does it need? How will it supplement the Indian naval power? Sir, thank you so much for joining me. This is obviously a subject which is something that I've started, reading and started trying to make myself a little more knowledgeable about, but I hope for your best inputs.
Thank you, Aadi. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. And I'm always impressed by the amount of effort and research you put in before you embark on one of your programs. And that's really good. It's good to see people in CV Street taking so much interest in matters military. Coming firstly to the maritime domain. Yes, you're right. We always believe in the Navy that India is sea blind because New Delhi is 900 miles from the sea. But that notwithstanding, the maritime domain has got neglected over the years, primarily because we've got two adversarial nuclear neighbors constantly sniping at our heels, in the north and on our west. And so obviously the attention has been more focused on them. And even at the sort of political level, trouble on the borders resonates more with somebody telling you something's happening at 2,000 miles out at sea. It doesn't resonate with people. Probably the only thing that really resonated with people was the attack on Mumbai on 26/11/2008, because it came into their drawing rooms, really speaking. And that's when suddenly maritime became this big issue that, how's our maritime security? Notwithstanding the fact that the Navy did a stellar job in 71 and has been, during Kargil, not very many people know that one of the reasons for Parakram and Kargil being sort of done away with was because of the heavy naval presence of Karachi in the North Arabian Sea. And had push come to shove, we'd have been able to sort of make sure that no ships would have reached Karachi and they would have been on their knees logistically. So one of the reasons for, as I understand it, for Nawaz Sharif asking Bill Clinton to broker a ceasefire was because they knew that they had their backs to the wall from a logistic perspective. There were no tankers coming in. They didn't have a tanker of their own. They only had one tanker of their own, and that had to be brave enough to venture through. And foreign tankers don't come in when something like this happens because insurance rates go up so high. So the Navy has quite a role to play, which obviously is not really seen because it's something that doesn't happen, in front of you. You see fighter jets flying in the sky, you see convoys moving, our military convoys moving on the road, but you never see a ship, what the ship is doing at sea once it leaves. So that's partly the reason. Anyway, coming back to where we were. Yeah, the second carrier, INS Vikrant, is likely to get commissioned, as you said, around Independence Day, perhaps on Independence Day. So that will be a very valuable addition to our naval capability. Firstly, aircraft carriers by themselves are very complex platforms. So the fact that we've been able to design, develop, and build one in India is a testament to not only our naval skills, our shipbuilding skills, but also to the national technological sort of capability and industrial capability of the country. And it's a strategic capability that we have developed. So that's one part of it, that India has moved into the next realm in shipbuilding. Coming to its operational benefits, now Indian Navy will be able to field two carrier battle groups, which is we already have the Vikramaditya. We were constrained that we had only one carrier battle group. One carrier battle group in the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean can only do that much and not more. But now that we'll have two, for whatever period they'll be operational, both of them, we'll be able to cover a much larger swath of the Indian Ocean. We'll be able to carry out surveillance. We'll be able to deploy across a much larger swath of the Indian Ocean. And therefore, this is an exponential leap in our power projection capability. Navies are a lot about power projection, blue water power projection capability. India is a big Navy. India is the leading Indian Ocean Navy. So we must have adequate power projection capability. Two carriers gives us a lot more than one carrier gives us. Where we have to be a little careful, and this I'll come to also, is that we may have two carriers, but carriers can't remain operational 12 months of the year after year. They come in for refits. They come in for repair cycles. which means that there are times when you'll only be constrained, you'll have only a one carrier. There may be even times when you may not have a carrier at sea, because one may be coming into refit, one may be going out of refit, one may be having to effect some emergency repairs, etc. And that is why the Navy has been harping on the fact that we need a third aircraft carrier. And 3 aircraft carriers means that at any time you can have 2 carrier battle groups deployable. And we need that because we were not only, at the moment we dominate the Western Indian Ocean because there is no other navy in the Western Indian Ocean which can take on the Indian Navy or is a match for the Indian Navy. We even dominate the Eastern Indian Ocean. And we are a great force to contain perhaps the future movement of the PLA Navy into the Indian Ocean. If we can dominate the Eastern Indian Ocean and the approaches to Malacca Straits and the Lombok Straits and the Sunda Straits. Plus, we are also sort of in a way responsible for our entire maritime neighborhood. There was a doctrine of Sagar, which the Prime Minister enunciated in 2015 for security and growth for all in the region. All these navies and all these countries look to India for support tomorrow if they find that there's a situation developing in the Indian Ocean. They will all look towards India to pull their fat out of the fire. So Indian Navy has a huge role to play. That's why Indian Navy considers itself what we say a provider of net security in the region. So 2 carrier battle groups gives you tremendous capability. We know that 5 or 7 or 10 years from now, we are going to have a substantial Chinese naval presence in the Indian Ocean. Yeah. The Chinese are building the Navy at a phenomenal pace and building blue water capability at a phenomenal pace. At the moment, they understand the limitations of their Navy. And if you realize that 2 years of a standoff along the LAC, including a skirmish, to whatever extent that was, and dangerous brinkmanship on many occasions along the LAC over the last 2 years, at no stage did the Chinese Navy ever provoke the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. It stayed well clear of the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. We never heard of a single incident where a Chinese naval ship came anywhere near an Indian naval ship, or tried to intimidate it, or tried to harass it, or tried to do anything, because they understand their limitation. And it is that limitation that they are seeking now to get over. China, unfortunately, is not blessed with a favorable maritime geography.
Yeah.
If you realize around China, there are small islands, small countries. They don't have they don't have a vast expanse of ocean. They've got South China Sea, etc., but no vast expanse of ocean. So this navy of 450 ships that they're building is obviously not meant to defend them in the South China Sea. That they have enough capability to defend themselves in the South China Sea. It is for them to project power across the globe. Maritime dominance has always been the key to global power, to global supremacy. Right from Mahan's days, right from the Peloponnesian Wars, right down to the British, right down to the Americans after that, after World War II. So that is the Chinese aim of building this navy. So China, if it has to project power, maritime power, it needs an open ocean space. The Indian Ocean provided that space. And so 5 or 7 years from now, it's going to be a huge. China is going to be operating extensively from the Indian Ocean and projecting its power into the Atlantic and all from here. That's why the Belt and Road Initiative, all these other things that have been happening. And it's what we call the string of pearls strategy.
Yes,
it's developing little bases and ports all over the place, where it is seeking control slowly through its debt trap diplomacy, etc., etc. So we have to not worry about the navy of today or the situation today. Navies don't get built in a day. The navy that you're planning to build today is meant for your requirement of 10 years down the line or 15 years down the line. That's the time when we'll actually need 3 aircraft carriers. And if we don't place that order for the 3rd aircraft carrier now, the 2nd indigenous aircraft carrier, what's known as the IAC-2, with, of course, greater added capability, we will find ourselves in a mess 10 years from now. We can't conjure up an aircraft carrier from somewhere all of a sudden.
Yeah.
That is one. Secondly, I did mention to you about the industrial capability, industrial skills. Now, building an aircraft carrier it's taken so long because you also side by side developed skills, personnel skills, human resource to build these kind of such a complex platform. You can't afford to lose that. If you don't order an aircraft carrier for the next 5 years, it's gone. That capability is gone. You'll have to restart training people all over again when you do decide to build a 2nd aircraft carrier. We made that mistake with submarines. We had the 2 HCW submarines which were built in 92 and 94, and then we blacklisted that company. We stopped building submarines. And in 2005, when we signed the contract for the Project 75, for the Scorpions, we had to start from scratch all over again, despite having built 2 submarines earlier. And now again, we're reaching the same stage. The 6th Scorpion-class submarine has been launched. It will get commissioned next year. And the next P-75I project is nowhere on the horizon. So we don't seem to be learning from our mistakes. We seem to be very casual about this lack of or loss of capability. That is something, in a case of an aircraft carrier, we certainly cannot afford. So it's not only about the military value of getting the second aircraft carrier, it's the total national ecosystem that an aircraft carrier supports that needs to be sustained.
I think that's the bottom line that you've mentioned, and skill and capability cannot be brought out of the clear blue sky. There's just nothing you can do to develop that overnight, and it's absolutely interesting. Sir, talking about our second edition, what is it that this aircraft carrier will carry by itself? What will be the capabilities? I know it's when you compare it to the super carriers that the US has and stuff like that, it's much smaller. But having said that, what will it carry, and what is its features?
Okay, primarily, see, this is an aircraft carrier which displaces about 45,000 tons, more or less, 40 to 45,000 tons, which places it in the category of a medium carrier.
Sure.
It's not like a super aircraft carrier like the Americans have, which are 100,000 tons. The Chinese have 65,000 ton carriers, and so do the Brits. The QE2 and the Elizabeth and the Prince of Wales are both 65,000 ton carriers. So this is a smaller carrier, but that's okay. You have to cut your coat according to your cloth.
Absolutely.
Now, at the time when we were proposing this whole aircraft carrier program was in the planning stages, India was economically not in a position where it could start talking big about building 80,000 ton and 90,000 ton carriers. The fact that we've been able to build a 45,000 ton carrier in itself is creditable. About 10 or 15 years ago, our economy was not as healthy as it is today. And that is why if you see the IAC-2 that we're talking about, the second indigenous aircraft carrier, we're talking about 65,000 ton aircraft carrier, which will be more or less similar to what the Brits have or even the Chinese have, with a much greater capability. Now, carriers, again, have sort of functions. One is an air defense sort of a role, where it protects itself and it protects the force around it as it goes around projecting power. So when we had the smaller carriers like the Virat and the Vikrant, they were primarily air defense carriers. They were not meant to go and strike targets far out at sea or far inland. They were more about defensive. That's why they were called air defense carriers, more or less. They had a strike role, but as the carrier gets bigger in displacement, the size of the aircraft, the quality of the aircraft it can embark also improves and increases. So the range of strike will increase. If it's a bigger carrier, it will have bigger aircraft, which will be able to strike much deeper into enemy territory. It will be able to carry a much wider range of aircraft. It can carry airborne early warning aircraft. It can carry anti-submarine helicopters. It can carry fighter jets. So it's all about capability. So I think Vikrant will be similar to Vikramaditya in capability. It will be about 45,000 tons. It will have limited strike role, but it will have for our kind of concept of operations in the current scenario, I think it is 2 aircraft carriers of that displacement are fairly sufficient to meet our immediate requirements. But we certainly do need to look at bigger carriers in the future, and the IAC-2 is going to be like that. So if you look at Vikrant by itself, it's got the complete range of weapon and sensor sort of complement, complete suite of weapons and sensors. It will carry fighter jets. It will carry anti-submarine warfare helicopters. It will carry airborne early warning helicopters. We have the Kama 31, which does the same thing. So it will have a combination of 3 or 4 kinds of aircraft. It will not be able to carry fixed wing aircraft other than the fighters at this point of time. Now, fighters also, which fighter will it carry? Now, whether it will carry the Tejas, which is at the moment not really being configured for this ship. So at the moment, I think it will continue to carry the MiG-29K, which is also on the Vikramaditya. But we have limited numbers in that, so we have to be looking at an alternative. Various trials are in progress. We keep reading in the newspapers about the F-18 and the Rafale jet and all coming in for various trials in Goa, etc., etc. So the Indian Navy, I think, or the Ministry of Defense is weighing their options. Thus, DRDO is developing an aircraft, or HAL is developing an aircraft called the TB, Twin Engine Deck Based Fighter, TEDBF. So hopefully, based on the experience from Tejas and the light combat aircraft, they'll be able to go to the next level and deliver this twin engine deck based fighter to the Indian Navy in 5 or 7 or 10 years from now. So it will have a pretty comprehensive capability, and when it has its whole complement of ships, its carrier battle group along with it, then it will be a very comprehensive sort of naval force to reckon with in the region.
So that's impressive. So, I'd like to go back to the development part of it. One thing that we realize a lot, many people may not like me for saying this, but we've been sleeping for about 5 decades right after an independence. We never bothered to, it was always easier for India to pick up something from the market rather than to put in resources to develop and think and innovate and stuff like that. Something that we see starting to happen now. If that's my personal opinion, maybe right, maybe wrong, sir. But having said that, as a baseline, how do you think what we've been able to achieve with this particular aircraft carrier with regards to about 60-65% is what we are saying is indigenous components? How do you see that as a capability in today's world, sir?
Okay, firstly, it's when you talk about indigenization and self-reliance in defense sector, yes, it took us time to get off the block. In fact, the Navy was the first one. We commissioned INS Nilgiri, a Leander-class frigate in 1972. And that was really the springboard from which Indian naval indigenization took off. With the result that today the 39 or 40 ships and submarines that the Indian Navy has ordered are all being built in Indian shipyards. We're not importing a single ship, a platform from anywhere. We may be importing certain equipment where we are short of our own indigenous capability, but we are delivering ships built in India, and that is very important because indigenization should not be confused with self-reliance. Indigenization is one aspect. That means you can build in India, or everything is Indian. The other is self-reliance. That means once I built it, with whatever help I may have taken from wherever, but now I have the capability in India to be able to not have to go back to a foreign supplier and say, can you support me in running the ship now day to day or repairing the ship? I should be able to do it on my own. I should be able to develop an ecosystem of spare parts which get built in India. So that is now the effort. If you see all those three services, in particular, the Navy has something called an indigenization plan. The Navy has something called the INIP, 2015-2030, Indian Navy Indigenization Plan, which is all about this only. Which are the areas where we can? What do we need to build? How do we encourage industry to do it? How do we explain to industry what we need? Because what is the industry's challenge? Industry's challenge is a return on the investment is never enough. The scales, it's about scalability. Unlike the automobile industry or anything else where you're selling to a wide population in the country, defense companies are selling to the Ministry of Defense. That's it. You only have one customer. If he buys from you, fine. If he doesn't buy from you, you're finished. So it is very important for the Ministry of Defense, therefore, to create an enabling environment where industry is encouraged to get into this sector. Just making a policy is not enough. We made many policies encouraging industry. We fail to see that policy through in its implementation, which discourages industry. They become skeptical about the intent. They say the policy is fine, but do they really want it to happen? There are questions like this that are often asked. The second unfortunate thing is that the MOD even today continues to support the DPSUs. They have not created a level playing field between the private sector and the DPSUs
Yeah.
because DPSUs belong to the MOD. Now that is not how you can go about it. The Ministry of Defense's job is to ensure a defense industrial base for India, not a defense industrial base of DPSUs. So till that mind block doesn't that mindset doesn't change, it's going to be very difficult for private industry to make a breakthrough. I can understand the L&Ts and the Tatas and the Bharat Forges. They have the sort of financial muscle to stay the course and hope things will change. But what about the number of MSMEs that are in the country? Poor guys who need those orders to just even probably pay their people the next month, but doing excellent cutting edge work. But are they getting recognized for it? So R&D, everything has to be a national effort. It has to be a national effort. It can't be a government effort only,
Yeah.
as it is today. So that's very important. So I think that is one area where we have to focus our attention on if we really want indigenization and self-reliance to happen.
So
the second area where I think we're doing we're trying to do a good job is to uh, get foreign industry. I mean, even the Prime Minister said, "Make in India" doesn't mean you got to make everything in India. He's encouraging foreign industry to come to India and make for the world from here. That's Make in India. Make in India, not make in India. Everything has to be developed, designed, manufactured in India. Because he knows, we understand the limitations in technology. But technology comes at a price. Nobody's going to, companies abroad and countries abroad spend billions and millions of dollars in developing technologies. They're not going to come and give it to you because they like your face. You've got to be willing to pay for it. We're not willing to do that. We want L1 everywhere. Now, when you like we say, if you want the cheapest, you'll get the cheapest. But it won't be the best, or it won't be what you want. So under this, and that is where we find that we are more succumbing more and more to this to kind of appease the sort of the perspective we are trying to project of transfer of technology. We are resorting to a lot of screwdriver technology. transfer of technology. That means I can assemble something. But in true indigenization or true absorption of technology would mean that if I can build Mark 1 of a particular equipment in India in collaboration with a foreign firm, and I have absorbed transfer of technology, Mark 2 of that equipment I should be able to do on my own.
One man.
I shouldn't have to go back to the guy and say, now please let's do TOT for Mark 2 also. Because then it's not TOT. Or not TOT in the accepted sense of the term.
True.
So that is another thing we have to focus on. If we need technology, we've got to make that effort. And the kind of investment that is required to develop cutting edge technologies, I don't think our industry has that sort of capacity at the moment. It needs to build that capacity. For that, you have to create the right environment to encourage them to build that capacity. So, and then second aspect, when you talk of 65% indigenization, yes, it is 65%. How do they calculate indigenization? Firstly, it's calculated that if a thing has cost, 10 crores, let's say, if 6 crores was paid in foreign exchange and 4 crores was paid in rupees, 40% indigenization has been achieved.
Okay.
Okay, it's not about actually what is the quality of that indigenization. What are the items in that 40% which are really the cutting edge, or the 60% which is imported is the cutting edge. So in the Navy, we have this concept of, a ship, we look at it from a trilogy of to fight, to float, and to move. To float, to move, and to fight. So to float means building the basic hull of the ship, the basic superstructure. That means if you put it in water, it will float. It won't move, it won't fight, it won't do anything, it will float. So that means basically your hull fabrication. In there, we've reached pretty good levels. We have almost 90% is indigenous. The steel that is being used in Indian ships is all Indian. We're not importing steel for our ships and submarines now. And of course, we have the welding skills. Our manpower has been trained in welding techniques, etc. We are even going in now for composites and all. So, as far as the float element goes, it's about 90%, which is universally accepted as more or less the correct figure. Then we come to the move element. The move element is the engines, the pumps, the systems, the propulsion systems, the auxiliary systems, which make the ship move. And the cooling systems, the air conditioning, etc., etc., etc. So that we have achieved about 60% or 65%. Of course, there are figures vary. There are people who say 70% also or 75%. But again, we have to see what exactly have we indigenized in that. Today, we cannot make a ship's diesel engine in India or a ship's gas turbine in India. So if you have done 65%, then this turbine or this engine is part of that other 35%. Now, if I don't have that engine on board, this ship won't move. So I can do nothing with that 65% which I have created till I don't have this 35%. So that's a factor you have to see. What exactly is it? So 65% is very creditable. I mean, we are making world-class pumps and all. You see some of the companies in India are doing outstanding work. Piping, pressure reducers, alternators, things like that, actuators. But we are still weak in the area of engines, gas turbines and diesel engines for our ships and submarines. Then you come to the to-fight element. Now, to-fight element is all about weapons and sensors. Basically, the ability of a ship to go and fight the war. In that, we are now at about, I would say, about 40%, 45%, but rapidly improving, because today, if you see any Indian naval ship, and this is very creditable again, the complete communication suite on an Indian naval ship or submarine is Indian. Most of the sonars, except the odd sonar here and there, which we've still not been able to build, are Indian. Most of the radars are Indian, being developed by Bell or being developed by. Some of them may have been in collaboration with other countries. Fine. Oh. So initially they were in collaboration, with the indigenous content steadily rising. But where we are slightly weak is in weapons per se. The missile, of course, we have the BrahMos missile, which is a hugely successful missile, and it's manning a lot of platforms. But we don't have enough numbers. We still have to go abroad for many, many things. So I think if we can keep this momentum going, and if we can create the right enabling environment, and if we can encourage industry to make the investment to collaborate with foreign companies and absorb their technologies, if we can encourage foreign industry with adequate inducement to come to India and co-develop and co-produce in India with Indian companies, where the Indian company remains the prime, then we'll be able to achieve this a lot faster. But unfortunately, these things are moving very slowly, as the strategic partnership model is showing. So the direction is right. I think this And I think recently, I don't know if you're aware, but in January, the Prime Minister gave a directive that he wants all what are called buy global cases, where everything is bought from abroad, in the defense ministry to be reviewed all over again. And now there's almost a blanket letter saying no more equipment will be imported unless in very exceptional circumstances, only with the defense minister's approval. So automatically, that earlier shortcut that we might as well get it from abroad is not going to work anymore.
I guess
And
that's
here, clear one myth that there's a myth generated by this narrative which emanates from the Ministry of Defense that the armed forces want foreign equipment. I want to keep reiterating this. The armed forces do not want foreign equipment. The armed forces want the best equipment. They have to go and fight a war. They're going to be on a front line. They're going to die. You can't send them with one arm tied behind their back. It is your duty to give them the best equipment that money can buy. If you have to import it, well, so be it. Otherwise, make it yourself. But you can't send them with second-hand equipment saying, oh, we are indigenous. That's very important.
I don't think anybody is going to say, "यार ये तो made in India है, इससे झगड़ा नहीं होगा." I mean, मेरे को बाहर से लाके दो तभी मैं झगड़ा कर सकता हूँ.
Give me good stuff here. Make it and give me. My job is to fight the war. My job is not how I get the stuff. That's for you to give me.
Absolutely, sir. I think they've put it very, very succinctly and much appreciated, sir. So we've talked about the capabilities in quite a much detail, and I in some senses I'm proud at where we are standing, and in some senses I feel left wanting to kind of for my country to do more with regards these particular aspects, and especially with the security threats that we have in the ocean. We'll talk about China in a little bit, and what it's bringing to the table in the next few years and stuff like that. But right now, I want to talk to you about the current security situation in the world, sir. All eyes are on Europe, and America, for that matter, has been accused of actually ignoring the Indo-Pacific. India has been called the net security provider in their Indo-Pacific policy, which was released in February 2022. It was interesting to read those words about India from USA after, I think, first time in history. Apart from that, India has been trying with France to have a independent Indo-Pacific policy of its own in cooperation with France. There's the Quad, there's the AUKUS, there's so much happening around in this region. But having said that, the entire focus right now, and I don't know for how long, is going to be in Ukraine because this thing keeps dragging on. Sorry for the long question, sir, but how does a new carrier that we've brought in help us in achieving a dream of this net security provider that the world probably is asking us to do? Point one. And point two is, with a lot of the focus over there in Europe, how do we build up for the future? Because these kind of incidents will keep happening.
Yeah, see, firstly, let's look at the situation in Europe at the moment. The Russia-Ukraine conflict. There are also lessons to be learned from there.
Yes.
What is happening today in Europe, or Russia's aggression, is not something that we didn't know would happen. Okay, this has been in the sort of pipeline for many, many years. Everyone knew that at some point of time Putin is going to assert himself.
Yeah.
And he's going to assert himself because he has a dream of Russia being a great power again.
He's been saying
it, sir. 2014, the Crimea should have been the biggest wake-up call for Europe. Europe chose to ignore it for whatever their personal interests. So I'm personal, the national interest may have been of Europe. Europe's again biggest challenge is the EU as such. While it has a lot of commonality and a lot of convergence, but there are a lot of divergences within. The Middle European countries think differently from North European countries. The advanced or the richer Western Europe countries think differently from the not so rich Eastern European countries. Countries bordering Russia have a different perspective towards the security situation there. So, for example, now Finland and Sweden are talking about joining NATO. All these years they didn't talk about joining NATO. Okay, they were associated with the West, but they were not part of NATO.
Yeah.
Now these are alarm bells that have now started ringing. Europe is very dependent on Russia for its gas. Now, how soon will it be able to sort of reduce that dependence? So Europe is constrained in how much it can do against Russia. No matter what they might say, particularly countries like Germany and all, which are closer to Russia. So they'll make the right noises. They'll sort of condemn the conflict, etc., condemn Russia, whatever they have to do. But they have to be very careful in their own economic interest to see how far can they go down that route. And Russia knows this. Russia is not stupid. I mean, Putin is not, he may be a lot of other things, but he's definitely not stupid. So before he embarked on this conflict, he must have gauged how the world is going to react. Of course,
Calculated.
for America, it's a big red flag because, the Cold War mentality still prevails over there. And if you see every American security document that has come in the last 5 or 6 years or 10 years, it talks about China and Russia being the two revisionist powers. That means they're trying to change the status quo. They're trying to revise the rules-based order. Uh, China more than Russia, because China is a more powerful country. And then on the sidelines was the Putin Xi Jinping meeting on the sidelines of the Winter Olympic Games. But that, of course, I don't see much in. It's nice right now. It's like my enemy's enemy is my best friend kind of concept right now, because neither Putin nor Xi Jinping are going to want to play second fiddle to each other at any point in time. So at some point of time, the cracks in this relationship are going to appear. So that's as far as the situation in Europe goes at the moment. How are we impacted? Certainly, we will be impacted economically in some way or the other. I think we've taken a brilliant stand. Personally, I think this is the best stand India could have taken. For once, it's taken a stand which is totally supportive of its own national interest and not what the world would like us to say, or the moral high ground we generally take, etc., etc. We've said yes, we are not happy with what's happening. We would like a ceasefire, but we've abstained on all the voting and we've desisted from mentioning the word Russia ever. Even in the French joint statement that came, if you see, France talked about Russia, we didn't. So we've been careful about that. I think we've calibrated things well. We've embarked on a diplomatic blitzkrieg in the last 4 months. Probably every leader of significance or every country of significance has had its leader visiting India, or foreign minister has been on a real diplomatic drive. He's gone and met just about everybody there is to meet. The prime minister had a hugely successful European tour of 3 days. So I think India has handled this whole situation very well. There was a perception that America would get so embroiled in the Ukraine-Russia conflict that they would neglect the Indo-Pacific. I don't think that's really true. America has enough capacity to handle Russia-Ukraine to the extent that they're handling it, and also continue to focus on the Indo-Pacific. The carrier battle groups are still there. Indo-PACOM's force levels are still maintained. In fact, even after the conflict started, Biden still had the time to have a Quad Leaders Summit. So things have been happening. It's not that he's neglecting this. China has been watching very carefully. I mean, everyone thought this will give China the excuse to go to Taiwan. China is not stupid. China is going to wait and watch. It's biding its time. This is not the time for it to go into Taiwan. It is watching how Russia-Ukraine unfold, how the world reacts. How much is the world really going to go tomorrow? So tomorrow, if let's say China decides that I'm going to annex Taiwan, and the world, fit of sort of indignation says we'll do this to you and we'll do that to you, China will know, well, they might say a lot of things, but this is all they can do. And that's what they're watching now. That's what they're watching very carefully.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be as easy as you think, or the Indo-Pacific is going to be impacted. It's not going to be directly impacted by what's happening in Europe, but certainly the ripples will be felt economically in this part of the world, not so much militarily. As far as India's position goes in the Indo-Pacific region, yes, India is by far extremely important to all these countries. It was not for nothing that Australia, Japan, Britain, everybody came to India, in the last 2 or 3 months. There was a reason for that, and this is despite India not condemning the conflict. That means the countries have reconciled themselves to the fact that India has its own interest. India is militarily dependent on Russia. It cannot afford to say anything against it. This would not have been the case 20 years ago. 20 years ago, the West would have put sanctions on us straight away for not condemning Russia. Today, it can't afford to do that to India. India is too important a country in the region for them to do that. So the Americans have not even once have they said that they will impose sanctions on India.
Yeah.
Of course, that Dilip Singh came as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and made a lot of statements about consequences. He wasn't shooting up the cup. He must have been sent with the message that go and at your level make the right sounds, but at the Biden level and the Prime Minister level, we're not going to criticize India openly, because India is again very important, and they don't want India to. Of course, I don't think it'll ever happen, but they don't want India to sort of drift to the other side either.
True.
The Russia, China, whatever
Yes.
axis that is forming there. But that won't happen because the trust deficit with Pakistan and China is too much for us to sort of ever be on their side. So that's not going to happen. So India is going to be extremely important. India must build its capacity accordingly because it knows it's going to be extremely important. But India's focus must, and I always emphasize this, must remain on the Indo-Pacific. There are enough resident Pacific powers. there's South Korea, there's Japan, there's Australia, there's the US in large numbers. There are enough people. There's Singapore, there's Malaysia, there's Thailand. All these people have fairly sizable navies and militaries. Indonesia, they're and in that restricted geographic space, they're enough. Who's there in the Indian Ocean? Nobody except India. This huge, vast expanse, except France to a certain extent. And that's where the French equation comes in. France has been a very dependable strategic partner for India. It was the only one which didn't impose sanctions on us after the 98 nuclear explosion. And that really was the springboard for the Indo-French strategic relationship to develop after that. It's made all the right noises about supporting India's industrial effort, indigenization, this, that, and all that, co-development, co-production. How much is actually happening is a matter of interpretation. But the message is clear. For us, France is extremely important in the Indian Ocean. It is a resident Indian Ocean power. Unlike any other European country, which is basically developed in like Germany and the Netherlands have developed an Indo-Pacific policy or a strategy to ensure that their trade is not harmed, their interests are not harmed in this region. But France, despite being a European, a leading country in Europe, is essentially a resident Indian Ocean power because 90% of its exclusive economic zone is in the Indo-Pacific. As the world turns to the sea for its future sustenance, this is going to be critical for France. So France's whole approach towards the Indo-Pacific is different from any other European powers approach to the Indo-Pacific or the Indian Ocean. And that is why it's very important that India has a very healthy relationship with France, because this is one country which we can count on to support us in the Indian Ocean. I'm not saying fight for us, support us, where India and France can work together towards creating this net security sort of environment in the region. Similarly, AUKUS. Now, AUKUS, unfortunately, France, I would think reacted a bit prematurely and a little immaturely to it by breaking up diplomatic relations, recalling ambassadors. They were not so much miffed about AUKUS; they were miffed about the submarine deal getting cancelled, because the French government is always very heavily invested in its defense industry. Most of the leading French defense companies are partly state-owned, and that is why you often find in every geopolitical interaction that France's leaders have with the Indian leaders, defense cooperation always figures in that. Co-production, co-development, things like that always figure that we will support your indigenization efforts, we will help you develop your AIP, and we are always by your side, etc., etc. So AUKUS was not so much, France was not so miffed about AUKUS because AUKUS per se, it was about them losing that huge order which they had for submarines without so much as a buy or leave by the Australians. But this was something that was in the offing. If you really read the Australian media over the last couple of years, this program was coming in for increasing criticism by the media, Australian media, and in Australian Parliament, because the $50 billion project had already become a $90 billion project, and there was no sign of any submarine in sight. And God knows where it would have gone after that. So France, okay, for whatever geopolitical reasons, France was miffed. But I think France should look inward and check, why did this happen? Perhaps some answers lie within.
It did happen, sir, and created an opportunity for India to actually step in and take a lot, and actually present itself as a good buyer. Because one thing that India-France relations, and this is just my opinion, is that they've been honest with us in whatever cases, and they've been able to. I mean, countries always hold their own interests, but they've been able to do whatever they needed to do. Of course, there's this whole deal about that we were speaking online about the submarines and stuff like that, but let's see how that actually pans out. Sir, coming to China, China is, as you said, watching this entire thing very carefully. Their plans of Taiwan, a lot of talk. I can read a lot of opinion pieces originating out of China, which talks about China needing to overhaul its Taiwan policy and overall its military intervention policy within Taiwan. They call it intervention rather than an invasion, and that's something which is very interesting to see. They've actually taken up the Solomon Islands. They've had a deal with them, and that was a huge chaos. The Australian talk about preparing for war. It's pretty much as serious as that. Now, here is my question to you. You mentioned we must concentrate on the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific, and a war in the western side of the Indo-Pacific would be not my war. How does this affect the Quad?
Look, firstly, I don't think that when you talk of war, I don't think anybody is going to go and fight a war for
Of course,
somebody
yeah.
else. I don't see the Indian Navy fighting a war in the Western Pacific for Australia against China. I mean, it's not going to happen. We may support it in many ways, we may do all that, but we're not going to have Indian naval ships in the middle of battle. So that's very clear. As far as the Solomon Islands goes, I think China's intention is to dominate the Pacific. There is no two ways about it. This is not the first time, they made many diplomatic overtures to the South Pacific Islands. Whether it be it Fiji, be it Papua New Guinea, be it Vanuatu and all those islands, etc., etc. They have, in fact, given them economic largesse to the extent where they've convinced them to break up diplomatic relations with Taiwan.
Yeah.
And many of these countries broke up diplomatic relations with Taiwan because of Chinese pressure. And for countries like this, such kind of economic largesse is very attractive. They are not seeing the larger picture of the debt trap they're going to find themselves in, or the Chinese domination that's going to happen 5 or 10 years from now, as is happening in Sri Lanka or elsewhere. At the moment, they're seeing a quick return. And frankly speaking, if today the South Pacific Islands are not so inclined towards Australia and the Oceania area region, is partly for them. They have themselves to blame. Australia neglected these islands for many years. They treated them as some little fellows on the side. They never paid attention to these islands for so many years. So today, if it's backfiring on them, I'm not surprised. But that China is coming in there is not a good thing, because China's whole aim of dominating the South Pacific and the South China Sea is economic. Once it dominates that, these places are very resource rich. China has developed its capabilities. It's got a fishing fleet which is the largest in the world. It's got research ships. It's got all kinds of things, ships doing all kinds of things all over the world. So the larger the sphere of influence it can create, the more access it has to the riches of the sea over the next 15, 20, 30 years. And that is what the Belt and Road Initiative is fundamentally about. What? About controlling the Indian Ocean. So it's economic and strategic, both. So what China has done in the Solomon Islands is not surprising at all. They've done it everywhere else. They're not doing nothing that Australia is getting very indignant about it. Yes, so are many others. But this is nothing unusual coming from China, frankly speaking. And I don't think it'll come. See, it won't come to war, but there will be
tensions,
confrontation in the South China Sea in 5 or 10, whatever number of years from now. There will be. It may not be a conflict, but there will be confrontation, because the contestation in these waters for great power supremacy is going to get more and more intensified as China keeps building up its power. At the moment, China is smart. It provokes you to a point to see how you react, because it provokes you to the extent within its own capabilities. It doesn't reach out beyond its own capability to do something. It stays there within that limit.
smart.
Its grey zone tactics are exactly that. What does it do in grey zone tactics? It sends its Coast Guard and maritime militia. So the provocation, he does a provocation, but he leaves the retaliation to you. He puts the ball for retaliation in your court. So let's say today he goes into, let's say, Vietnamese waters or Malaysian waters and starts doing illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, supported by its maritime militia and Coast Guard. And when the Malaysian Navy comes there with its 2-3 ships, it intimidates them, surrounds them, bullies them, everything. Now, if by any chance one of the Malaysian ships were to fire a shot in anger, he said, "Look, Malaysia attacked me." So they go about it very smartly. They're not. Their grey zone tactics are all about this: create this nebulous state between peace and war, and let the other guy escalate it. They're doing the same thing on the LAC, in a way. If you really look at it, they come, they provoke you, they stay there, but they don't go beyond a certain point.
Whenever it gets heated up, they.
So I think South Pacific, China will continue to put pressure in the South Pacific, in the Eastern Indian Ocean, and Australia. Now that Australia is more or less on a path of confrontation with China in terms of what it's saying and etc., etc., all the like-minded countries in this region have to get together to be able to project maritime power to contain China. And that doesn't mean fight a war, but let China realize that the forces ranged against it are overwhelmingly superior to what it has, and so it's going to be a loser in any case. And that's when you have big navies like the US Navy or the Australian Navy and the South Korean Navy and the Japanese Navy, all of them ranged against it in the restricted waters of the South Pacific, of the South China Sea or the or the Pacific Rim, certainly China would think twice before doing any adventurism over there.
I was just writing down something that I need to think about, because one thing that you mentioned, that the next 5-10 years, prodded me to something that the Russians prepared for about 8 years for this conflict. How will the Chinese now look at their areas of conflict, and how will they prepare for the world reaction to them? So that's something going to be interesting as a thought processor. I'd
No,
like
China's
to,
definitely.
please, sir.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
No, please, please,
Yeah,
please.
no. I said China's got a long-term strategy. It said 2035. It said 2049. It's given these cardinal dates and is
Yeah.
working towards that.
Hmm.
And be very careful to not do anything to let that that balance get disturbed.
So, as a closing comment, I'd like to, although you referred to the air power in the second aircraft carrier, which is the primarily what we wanted to talk about, and of course that takes in a lot from the security of the region. So, the air power wise, your pick on the aircraft, and nothing official, but your pick and why, and of course your opinion of the IAC, whether we will see this getting approved in the next 1 or 2 years.
Well, I won't hazard a guess on the aircraft. it's too sensitive a subject to talk about.
But
But I think the
there are
aircraft
three,
in
four in the
contention.
offing.
Yeah, if you see the aircraft in contention, they all have their strengths. Huh?
Yeah.
They're all very successful in their own navies and air forces.
Hmm.
All been extremely successful aircraft. Whether you take the Hornet, or you take the Gripen, or you take the Rafale,
So far.
or any of these. So they're all very successful. Now, what is best suited for us is what we
Indeed.
have to decide on.
Indeed.
It doesn't necessarily have to be the best. It doesn't have to necessarily be the most expensive. It has to be the one best suited for us. Similar argument was given for the MMRCA also.
Yeah.
That people said the Eurofighter is the best, or so and so the best. We said it's not about the best. It's what we require. What is our requirement? We have to balance the budget also. We have to balance capability, and we have to balance our future requirements. So when you take all these three things into consideration, I mean, today this aircraft that you choose will also have a bearing on what the size of the aircraft carrier will be, what kind of a aircraft aviation facilities complex is it supposed to have. It has other issues also, the maintainability of the aircraft, your logistic supply chains, etc. Uh, Standardization of equipment, capability to upscale in the future and indigenize. So it's going to be it's many factors, including the capability of the aircraft carrier from where the aircraft has to operate. There's no point having a small aircraft carrier with a aircraft that can go all over the place. It can't operate. It will be restricted in how much it can do. So that is one. But as far as the aircraft carrier goes, yes, the Indian Navy wants a slightly larger aircraft carrier, the IAC-2, a 65,000 ton aircraft carrier, because it is very important for any aircraft carrier capable Navy to have adequate strike capability from that aircraft carrier. That means he should be able to take the battle to the enemy and not be in a defensive role, protecting itself from the enemy. The carrier battle group should be able to go in harm's way and seize the initiative from the enemy. For that, you need a bigger carrier. And because today, in our scenario, if you see, if we can open a front to the land battle from the sea, it's going to complicate the situation a hell of a lot more for the enemy. So while you're launching your airstrikes from your land bases, what if you can start launching airstrikes from the sea? And land attack missiles and land and strike aircraft. So we do need a larger aircraft carrier. There's no doubt about that, because if the Indian Navy is to be the kind of Navy that India wants it to have, a power projection, blue water capable, multi-dimensional Navy in a futuristic, network battle centric, network centric environment, with autonomous platforms and all, these aircraft carriers are not going to be just platforms for launching aircraft. They're going to have a much larger role. The relevance of an aircraft carrier is often questioned in modern warfare, saying it's vulnerable, it's a huge platform, what does it do? But aircraft carriers have remained relevant for years and years. Not if you remove it, don't put aircraft carrier operations of tomorrow on a World War II template and say, oh, it's of no use, it'll get shot down. It can do a lot more now. Maybe you in fact, instead you adapt the platform to the requirements of futuristic warfare. Unmanned platforms. It can be a hell of a command platform for unmanned capability. It's got many things can be done with an aircraft carrier. So we got to start thinking futuristic on how to deploy an aircraft carrier best. After all, if navies today are investing in aircraft carriers, China is building 5, the UK has just built 2, France has built 1, the US is continuing to build. They must be seeing some role for it 40 or 50 years down the line, isn't it? Because that's the life of an aircraft carrier. They're not looking at an aircraft carrier for 5 years. They're looking at an aircraft carrier, how to use an aircraft carrier for the next 50 years. So that's the life of an aircraft carrier. So obviously, it's not something that is as useless as some people like to make it out to be. It's got a role. It has to evolve. That role of the aircraft carrier has to evolve with the evolution of the battle space and technology.
Interesting, sir. Thank you so much. I mean, you've taken us through a whirlwind of information with regards to one, the aircraft carrier itself, which I hope we see during the Independence Day week or somewhere sometime around that, because these things, of course, are hugely technical. And picking out one date, I'm not wanting to stick my neck out. I hope it is on the Independence Day so that we can actually celebrate that. Having said
Yeah.
that, the importance of that carrier, the geopolitical scenario around aircraft carriers, and of course the indigenization factor, that I think you and I have taken this indigenization topic 2-3 times now, where we've spoken about the need for developing capability and the difference about make in India and make in India for the world sort of a scenario. And that's something that you have brought out very, very well. So thank you so much. As always, sir, it's very, very interesting to talk to you about a subject that I'm trying my level best to learn more and more about. I hope I'm a little better going forward in the future in the next conversation that we have. Till then, sir, Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Aadi. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and interact with you. Looking forward to our future interaction as well. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.